I was standing in the security line at Denver International Airport checking my watch when 4 submachine guns were suddenly pointed at my chest. "Sir, step away from the bag and get on your knees now." The command was screamed so loud it silenced the entire terminal. I did not panic. I did not run. I simply looked at the TSA agent and calculated the odds. My son Jason thought this public humiliation would break me. He thought getting me arrested would stop me from making my flight to Seattle. He thought he could steal my $8 million estate while I rotted in a holding cell. But as the cold linoleum floor pressed against my cheek and handcuffs bit into my wrists, I started laughing. Because I knew something the police did not. That device in my bag wasn't a bomb, and the call that sent them here was the biggest mistake my son ever made. Before I tell you how I turned a federal arrest into a weapon against my own family, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had to fight a war against the people who are supposed to love you the most. My name is Harrison Bennett, but everyone calls me Harry. For 30 years, I worked as an air traffic controller at O'Hare, handling the kind of pressure that would make a normal man have a heart attack before lunch. I have guided Boeing 747s through blinding blizzards with zero visibility, and I have prevented mid-air collisions with seconds to spare. You do not survive in that tower by panicking. You survive by analyzing data, by staying cold when everyone else is hot, and by knowing exactly what the regulations say. So when I stood in the TSA pre-check lane that Tuesday morning, I was in my element. I was 75 years old, but I was sharp. I had my shoes on, my belt was already off, and my liquids were in a clear quart-sized bag. I was efficient. I checked my watch again. It was 8:45 in the morning. My flight to Seattle was scheduled to board in 40 minutes. If I missed that flight, I missed the hearing. And if I missed the hearing, a judge would sign a piece of paper declaring me incompetent. My son Jason and his wife Megan had spent 6 months building a case against me. They told the court I was senile. They told the court I was a danger to myself. They claimed I needed a conservator to manage my assets. It was a lie. A greedy, calculated lie designed to strip me of the money I had saved for decades. I placed my leather carry-on bag on the conveyor belt. It was an old bag, weathered and tough, just like me. I watched it disappear into the X-ray tunnel. I walked through the metal detector. No beep. I waited for my bag to slide out the other side, but it did not come out. The conveyor belt stopped. I saw the TSA agent behind the monitor stiffen. Her eyes went wide. She hit a silent button under the desk and stepped back. I knew that body language. In the control tower, when a blip disappears from the radar, you don't scream, you execute protocol. She was executing a threat protocol. "Is there a problem, officer?" I asked, keeping my voice level. She did not answer. She waved at her supervisor. Within 10 seconds, the energy in the security area shifted. The ambient noise of rolling suitcases and crying babies vanished. People were backing away. That was when the shouting started. "Sir, do not move. Hands in the air. Now!" 4 officers from the airport police division swarmed the checkpoint. 2 of them had rifles. The other 2 had tasers drawn and aimed at my chest. A red strobe light began flashing on the ceiling. I slowly raised my hands. "I am complying," I said calmly. "My name is Harrison Bennett. I am a retired federal employee. I am not a threat. Get on the ground." "On the ground now." A heavy hand shoved my shoulder. My knees of ice hit the hard floor with a crack that sent a jolt of pain up my spine. I gritted my teeth, but I did not cry out. I let them push my face into the cold tile. I felt the heavy weight of an officer's knee pressing into my lower back, right where my arthritis usually flared up. They wrenched my arms behind me. The metal cuffs clicked shut so tight they pinched the skin. I could hear the gasps of the other passengers. To them, I was a spectacle, a terrorist, a senile old man who had lost his mind. I could feel their phone cameras pointed at me, recording my humiliation. Somewhere in this airport, or maybe watching a live feed from home, my son Jason was smiling. This was his plan, I was sure of it. "You have the right to remain silent," the officer barked, dragging me to my feet. He was a big man, with a red face and a name tag that read, Sergeant Miller. He looked terrified. Fear makes people dangerous. I needed to de-escalate him before he did something stupid. "Sergeant," I said, making direct eye contact, "I understand you are following protocol for a code red, but you need to check the X-ray again." "Shut up," the officer snapped, pushing me forward. "We have a credible tip that you are carrying an improvised explosive device. We also have information that you are a dementia patient who has escaped custody." Dementia. There it was. The word Jason used like a weapon. "I am not a dementia patient," I said, my voice dropping an octave to the tone I used when I had to tell a pilot to abort a landing. "And I am not carrying a bomb. I am going to a court hearing in Seattle to prove exactly what you are repeating is a lie." They did not listen. They marched me through the terminal, past the staring crowds. I saw a mother pull her child close as I passed, as if I were a monster. The shame tried to rise up in my throat like bile, but I swallowed it down. Shame is a useless emotion. Anger is fuel. I burned with a cold, focused anger. They shoved me into a small concrete interrogation room in the bowels of the airport. It smelled of stale coffee and industrial cleaner. They sat me in a metal chair bolted to the floor. Sergeant Miller stood on the other side of the table, his hand resting on his holster. A bomb squad technician walked in carrying a portable scanner. He looked at my bag, which sat on the table like it was a coiled snake. "Open it," Miller ordered. The technician carefully unzipped the main compartment. He used a long pair of tongs to reach inside. He pulled out my shaving kit, then my fresh shirts. Then he reached into the bottom lining. He pulled out a black rectangular box about the size of a brick. It had wires taping it to a battery pack, and a small red light was blinking rhythmically. "Got it," the technician said, his voice tense. "It looks like a remote detonator." Miller looked at me with pure disgust. "You sick old man. You were going to take down a plane full of families. Why?" "Because your brain is rotting and you want to take everyone with you." I stared at the black box, at the black. My heart rate did not jump. My breathing did not hitch. I looked at that device and I analyzed it with the same precision I used to analyze flight paths. I saw the brand name stamped on the plastic casing in tiny letters. I saw the type of antenna protruding from the side. And I realized exactly how stupid my son really was. He was desperate. And desperate men make sloppy mistakes. "That is not a bomb, Sergeant," I said. Miller slammed his hand on the table. "Do not lie to me. We have the 911 call. Your son called us. He was crying. He said you stopped taking your meds and started talking about purification by fire. He said you built this in the garage." "My son is a liar and a thief," I said, steady. "And if you look closely at that device, you will see a USB port on the side. That is a Trackstar 4000. It is a high-end GPS tracker used for shipping containers. It has a blinking light to indicate satellite connection. It is not an explosive." Miller hesitated. He looked at the technician. The tech squinted at the box. He pulled out a multi-tool and carefully pried the casing open. He paused. "Well," Miller demanded. "It is empty," the tech said. "I mean, there are no explosives. It is just a circuit board and a battery. It really is just a GPS tracker." The room went silent. The tension that had been strangling the air suddenly snapped. Miller looked from the box to me, then back to the box. His face went from red to pale. He realized he had just assaulted a senior citizen based on a false report. "Uncuff me," I said. It was not a request. Miller fumbled for his keys. "Look, Mr. Bennett, we had to be sure. The report said..." The report was a swatting attempt. I interrupted, rubbing my wrists where the metal had dug in. My son planted that in my bag to stop me from getting on that plane. He knew if the police detained me, I would miss the hearing. He knew you would confiscate my electronics, so I could not call my lawyer. I stood up. My knees ached, but I stood tall. I looked at the bag on the table. But Jason is not just sloppy, I said, my mind racing ahead, connecting the dots. He is also greedy. He would not just plant a fake bomb. He would want an insurance policy. He would want to make sure that even if you realized it was not a bomb, you would still have a reason to hold me. I pointed a shaking finger at the side pocket of the bag, the small pocket I never used. Check the side pocket, I commanded. Miller frowned. Why? Because my daughter-in-law is a pharmacist, I said. And if they wanted to frame me for dementia and erratic behavior, they would need to prove I was under the influence of something illegal. Check the pocket. Miller nodded to the tech. The technician unzipped the small side pouch. He reached in and pulled out a translucent orange prescription bottle. There was no label on it. He rattled it. It was full of blue pills. The tech unscrewed the cap and dumped a few into his gloved hand. He sniffed them. Oxycodone, he muttered. High dose. Looks like street value of about $2,000. Miller looked at me, his eyes narrowing again. You just told on yourself. You are trafficking narcotics, I laughed. A dry, harsh sound. Do you really think a man who spent 30 years following federal aviation regulations would be stupid enough to smuggle drugs through an airport he used to work at? I asked. I did not put those there, but I knew they would be there, because my son needs me to be a criminal or a lunatic. He does not care which one as long as I do not get to Seattle. I leaned forward, placing my hands on the interrogation table. Now, Sergeant, you have a choice. You can arrest me for possession of narcotics that have no fingerprints on the bottle except my son's. Or you can pull the security footage from the drop-off curb. You will see a black SUV. You will see my son Jason handing me my bag. And if you zoom in, you might just see him slipping something into that side pocket while he hugged me goodbye. Miller stared at me. He was beginning to realize he was a pawn in a family game. And one more thing, I added softly, delivering the final blow. You said my son called 911. You said he was crying. Yes, Miller said. He sounded distraught. Pull the tape, I said. Pull the audio of the call. And I want you to listen to the background noise. If he called from his house like he claimed, you will hear nothing. But if he called from the airport parking lot to watch the show, you will hear the jet engines. Miller grabbed his radio. Get me dispatch. I need the audio on the Bennett bomb threat. Now. I sat back down in the metal chair. I checked my watch. My flight had just taken off. I had missed it. The hearing was in 4 hours. I was stuck in a police room 1,000 miles away. But for the first time in months, I did not feel helpless. I felt like I was back in the control tower. The storm was here, but I had just grabbed the microphone. Jason wanted a war. Well, he just declared one on the wrong veteran. The fax machine in the corner of the interrogation room started screeching. It was a sharp mechanical sound that grated against my nerves, but I did not flinch. I sat with my hands cuffed to the metal table, watching Sergeant Miller pull a stack of warm paper from the tray. He read the cover sheet, and his expression shifted from anger to something far worse. Pity. He looked at me the way you look at a dog that needs to be put down. This was the moment the trap truly snapped shut. My son Jason had not just planted a fake bomb to make me miss my flight. He had prepared a narrative to bury me alive. Miller tossed the papers onto the table in front of me. They slid across the metal surface and stopped just inches from my cuffed hands. I looked down. It was a medical report. The letterhead belonged to a Dr. Eris Thorne, a psychiatrist I had met exactly once because Jason insisted on it. The diagnosis was highlighted in bold: rapid onset dementia with paranoid delusions. Mr. Bennett, Miller said, his voice dropping to a condescending softness that made my skin crawl. We just received this from your son. He says you have been off your medication for 3 days. He says you have been talking about conspiracies and people stealing your money. I looked at the paper. It was a masterpiece of fiction. It claimed I forgot my own address. It claimed I had violent outbursts. It was dated 2 days ago. This is why you are here, Miller continued, sitting down opposite me. We are not going to charge you with a federal crime for the GPS tracker. We are placing you on a 5150 psychiatric hold. An ambulance is on its way to transport you to the county mental health facility. Your son has been granted temporary medical proxy. My blood ran cold. A psychiatric hold meant 72 hours of lockdown. It meant missing the court hearing in Seattle entirely. If I missed that hearing, the judge would see this medical report and grant Jason full conservatorship by default. I would never leave that hospital as a free man. They would drug me until I was the vegetable they claimed I was. I looked Miller in the eye. That report is a forgery, I said, keeping my voice steady. Dr. Thorne is a friend of my daughter-in-law. I have never been diagnosed with dementia. I can recite the entire pre-flight checklist for a Boeing 747 from memory. I can tell you that your blood pressure is elevated because the vein in your neck is pulsing. I am not crazy, Sergeant. I am being framed. Miller sighed and rubbed his temples. They always say that, Mr. Bennett. Look, the ambulance will be here in 20 minutes. Just sit tight. I had 20 minutes. 20 minutes before my life effectively ended. I needed to shatter his certainty. I needed to prove that the reality he was being fed was a lie. I have the right to one phone call, I said. Miller frowned. You can call a lawyer when you get to the hospital. I have the right to a phone call now. I insisted, leaning forward as much as the cuffs allowed. Unless you are formally charging me with terrorism, in which case I want a federal attorney. But if this is just a medical hold, let me make my call. Miller hesitated. He knew the rules. He unclipped a phone from his belt and placed it on the table. Make it quick. I picked up the receiver with my shaking hands. My fingers hovered over the keypad. A normal man would call his lawyer. But Rachel Zane was already in Seattle waiting for me. She could not stop an ambulance in Denver. I needed evidence right here, right now. I dialed a number, but not a lawyer. I dialed my own home landline. Miller watched me, confused. Who are you calling? My house, I said. Why, Miller asked. Your son is supposedly at the airport crying about you. Exactly, I said. I put the phone on speaker. The line rang. Once, twice, thrice. On the fourth ring, someone picked up. Hello, a female voice answered. It was Megan, my daughter-in-law. Her voice was calm, almost bored. Megan, I said. There was a pause. Oh. Harry. Where are you? I am at the airport, Megan, I said, watching Miller's face. I missed my flight. Oh, that is too bad, she said, and I could hear the smile in her voice. Jason was so worried. He is out looking for you right now. He is frantic. Is he? I asked. Is he at the airport? Yes, she said smoothly. He has been there for an hour. He called the police. He is heartbroken, Harry. Just come home. We will get you the help you need. I hung up the phone. I looked at Miller. You heard that. She says he is here. He has been here for an hour. Miller shrugged. So what? That matches his story. Does it? I asked. If he is here at the airport, frantic and heartbroken, why did he call 911 instead of approaching the security desk? If he saw me at the checkpoint, why didn't he stop me himself? Because he is scared of you, Miller snapped. You are unstable. I am not unstable, I said, my voice hardening. And I am about to prove it. You have the audio file from the 911 call. You said dispatch sent it over. Miller nodded. Yeah, I have it. Play it, I commanded. Miller looked at the clock. The ambulance is almost here. Play the damn tape, Sergeant, I shouted, slamming my cuffed hands on the table. If I am crazy, it won't matter. But if I am right, you are about to kidnap a sane man and hand his $8 million estate to a criminal. Do you want that on your badge? Miller stared at me for a long moment. He saw the intensity in my eyes. It wasn't the wild look of a madman. It was the absolute certainty of a professional. He pulled a small digital recorder from his pocket and pressed play. The voice of my son Jason filled the small room. It was a performance worthy of an Oscar. Please help me, he sobbed into the phone. My name is Jason Bennett. I am at Denver International. My father... Oh God. My father has a bomb. He is at the TSA checkpoint. He says he is going to purify the sinners. Please stop him. Miller stopped the tape. See? He says he is at the airport. Play it again, I said, closing my eyes. What? Play it again. And turn the volume all the way up. Do not listen to the crying. Listen to the room. Miller grunted, but he turned the volume dial to the maximum. He pressed play again. I sat in the darkness of my own mind. This was what I did for 30 years. I filtered out static. I ignored the panic of pilots screaming in bad weather. I hunted for the background sounds that told me the truth. Engine hum, wind shear, hydraulic failure. Every environment has a sonic fingerprint. I listened to Jason's fake sobs. I listened to the silence behind his voice. And then, at the 12-second mark, I heard it. Stop, I said, opening my eyes. Miller paused the tape. Did you hear that? I asked. Hear what Miller asked. It is just static. Rewind 3 seconds, I said. Listen to the high-pitched chime in the background. It is faint, but it is there. 2 distinct tones, a D sharp followed by a B natural. Miller looked at me like I was speaking alien. I leaned in. That sound is not an airport sound, Sergeant. Denver International uses a standard single-tone chime for announcements. That sound on the tape is a 2-tone arrival chime. Specifically, it is the chime of a Schindler 5500 residential elevator. Miller blinked. A what? A Schindler 5500 elevator, I repeated. I know that sound because I served on the Homeowners Association board of my condominium building when we installed them last year. I heard that sound every single day. I pointed at the recorder. My son was not at the airport when he made that call. He was not watching me at the security line. He was standing in the elevator of my building 20 miles away, probably heading down to the parking garage after planting the tracker in my bag. Miller looked at the recorder, then back at me. He was skeptical, but doubt was creeping in. You can't possibly know that for sure, he said. It could be any elevator. It gets better, I said, cutting him off. Listen to the acoustic reflection. His voice is echoing slightly. It is a small, enclosed metal box. If he were in the main terminal of DIA, like he claims, the background sound would be best. You would hear the hum of the HVAC system, which runs at 60 Hz. You would hear the PA system. You would hear thousands of people. I paused, letting the logic sink in. There is zero background noise on that tape except for that elevator chime. He was alone, in a box, in my building. Miller picked up the recorder. He held it up to his ear and played the segment again. He listened intently. He frowned. He walked over to his computer. He plugged the recorder in. He opened a basic audio visualizer program. I watched the green waveforms dance on the screen. Look at the frequency spike, I said, pointing at the monitor with my chin. That spike right there at 12 seconds. That is the chime. Now look at the ambient noise floor. It is almost flat. Miller was silent. He zoomed in on the waveform. If he was at the terminal, the noise floor should be jagged, I said. It should be chaotic. That line is flat, Sergeant. He lied to a federal dispatcher. He made a false report of terrorism. And he did it from the comfort of his own elevator. Miller turned slowly to face me. The pity was gone from his eyes, replaced by a dawning realization of how badly he had been played. He picked up the desk phone. He dialed a number. "Dispatch, this is Miller. I need you to triangulate the cell tower data for the 911 call from Jason Bennett. Yeah, the bomb threat. I need to know exactly which tower picked up that call." He waited, holding the phone to his ear. I sat back in my chair. The adrenaline was starting to fade, replaced by a throbbing ache in my shoulders, but I did not care. I had just intercepted a missile. Miller's eyes widened as he listened to the voice on the other end. "Are you sure?" "Okay. Send me the coordinates map." He hung up. He looked at me, and for the first time there was respect in his gaze. "The call bounced off the tower on Alameda Avenue," Miller said quietly. "That is downtown, nowhere near the airport." "My building is on Alameda," I said. Miller swore under his breath. He looked at the medical report on the table, the paper that was supposed to be my death sentence. He picked it up, crumpled it into a ball, and threw it into the metal wastebasket in the corner. "Cancel the ambulance," he shouted to the officer outside the door. He walked over to me. He pulled a key from his belt. He reached down and unlocked the handcuffs. The metal clicked open. I rubbed my wrists, feeling the blood flow back into my hands. "I am sorry, Mr. Bennett," Miller said. "It looks like we have a situation." "We do not have a situation, Sergeant," I said, standing up and smoothing my wrinkled jacket. "You have a felony false reporting case. I have a court hearing to get to." Miller checked his watch. "Your flight left 40 minutes ago. The next commercial flight to Seattle is fully booked until tomorrow morning. You are not going to make it." I looked at the clock on the wall. It was 9:30. The hearing was at 2. "I am a controller, Sergeant," I said, adjusting my collar. "I have spent my life moving impossible objects through impossible spaces. I am getting to Seattle, but I am going to need your help to access the tarmac." Miller looked at me. "You have a plane." "I have something better," I said, pulling a small black book from my pocket. "I have a favor owed to me by the man who runs logistics for Global Cargo. And if I remember correctly, his bird leaves in 45 minutes. I walked toward the door. The interrogation was over. The war was just beginning, and now I had the police on my side. As I sat in that sterile police room waiting for the cell tower data to clear my name, my mind drifted back to the moment this nightmare truly began. It was not at the airport. It started 6 months ago on a rainy Tuesday night in November. That was the night I opened my front door and let the enemy inside. I remember the sound of the rain against the siding of my house in Denver. It was a rhythmic tapping that usually helped me sleep, but that night it was drowned out by the desperate pounding on my front door. When I opened it, I found my son Jason and his wife Megan standing on the porch, soaking wet and shivering. They looked like refugees from a war zone. Jason had tears mixing with the rain on his face. He collapsed into my arms, sobbing like a child. "Dad, we lost everything," he choked out. "The market crashed. The investors pulled out. They took the house, Dad. They took the cars. We have nowhere to go. I am a father first and an air traffic controller second. When you see your child in distress, you do not ask for flight plans or verify coordinates. You just clear the runway." I ushered them inside. I gave them dry towels and hot tea. I listened to their story of a crypto exchange collapse that wiped out their savings and left them with crushing debt. It was a convincing performance. Jason played the broken businessman perfectly, and Megan played the supportive but terrified wife. I told them they could stay in the guest wing for a few weeks until they got back on their feet. I told them that family helps family. I did not know then that I was inviting a Trojan horse into the fortress I had spent 40 years building. For the first week, everything seemed fine. They were grateful. They were helpful. They cooked dinner. They fixed the leaky faucet in the laundry room. But then the subtle shifts began. It started with Megan. She came into the kitchen one morning while I was organizing my weekly pill organizer. I have taken medication for hypertension for 20 years. It is a simple regimen managed by my cardiologist. I have never missed a dose and I have never made a mistake. But Megan placed her hand on my arm with a look of deep concern. "Harry," she said, her voice dripping with artificial sweetness, "I noticed you are taking the generic lisinopril. You know, as a pharmacist, I have read some studies about the binders they use in that brand. They can cause cognitive decline in men your age. Let me handle this for you. I can get you the premium compound from my pharmacy. It is safer." I should have said no. I should have told her that my brain was the sharpest tool I owned, and I did not need her interference. But I trusted her. She was family. She was a professional. So I handed over my health to the woman who was plotting my demise. She replaced my familiar white tablets with new blue capsules. She said they were better. She said they would protect my heart and my mind. 3 days later, the fog rolled in. It was not a sudden blackout. It was a slow, creeping grayness that settled over my brain. I would wake up in the morning feeling like I had not slept at all. My limbs felt heavy as if I were moving through water. I started losing words. I would be in the middle of a sentence and the noun I needed would just vanish. I would walk into a room and forget why I was there. I would look at the clock and realize 3 hours had passed while I was just staring at the wall. For a man whose entire life was built on precision, this was terrifying. I started to doubt myself. Was this it? Was this the inevitable decline I had feared? Was my motherboard finally failing? Jason and Megan capitalized on every slip. If I forgot where I put my glasses, Jason would sigh loudly and exchange a worried look with Megan. "Dad, we just talked about this," he would say. "You put them in the fridge again. Do you remember doing that?" I did not remember doing that because I had not done it. But in my drugged state, I believed them. I started to apologize. I started to make myself smaller. I stopped driving because I was afraid I would hurt someone. I stopped calling my friends because I was ashamed of my slurred speech. I became a ghost in my own house, haunting the hallways, while my son and his wife took over the living world. They moved their things into the main living room. They changed the channel on my television. They started talking about me in the third person while I was sitting right there. "He is having a bad day," Megan would whisper to Jason. "We need to look into assisted living facilities. It is not safe for him here." I might have accepted my fate if it were not for Radar. Radar is my Maine Coon cat. He is 15 pounds of orange fur and attitude. He is the only living creature I fully trusted. He usually sleeps at the foot of my bed, but one evening about 2 months into the occupation, he jumped onto the kitchen counter while I was preparing my dinner. I was feeling particularly dizzy that night. My hands were shaking. I had crushed my evening blue pill into a bowl of applesauce because Megan said it absorbed better that way. I turned my back to get a spoon and heard a lapping sound. Radar was eating the applesauce. I shooed him away, but he had already consumed about half the bowl. I cleaned it up and didn't think much of it. I went to bed hungry and fell into a fitful sleep. The next morning, Radar did not come for breakfast. I found him in the laundry basket. He was breathing, but he was limp. His eyes were half open but unseeing. I picked him up and he was dead weight. Panic surged through me, cutting through the chemical haze in my brain. I rushed him to the vet down the street. I told the vet my cat had had a stroke. The vet was a young woman named Dr. Lewis. She ran blood work and put Radar on fluids. I sat in the waiting room for hours, trembling not from age, but from fear of losing my only companion. When Dr. Lewis came out, she looked puzzled. "Mr. Bennett," she said, "Radar didn't have a stroke. He is stoned." "Excuse me," I asked. "His toxicology screen is lighting up like a Christmas tree," she said. "He has a massive amount of benzodiazepines and a sedative called scopolamine in his system." "Did he get into your medication?" I stared at her. "I don't take sedatives," I said. "I take blood pressure medication." "Well," Dr. Lewis said, handing me the report, "unless your cat has a Xanax prescription, someone gave him a dose strong enough to knock out a horse. He will be fine, but he needs to sleep it off for another 24 hours. I drove home alone. The fog in my head was still there, but a red warning light had started flashing on my mental dashboard. Benzodiazepines, scopolamine. These were not heart medications. These were chemical restraints. They were giving me the same cocktail. When I walked into the house, Megan was in the kitchen. "Oh, Harry," she chirped. "Where is Radar?" "He is at the vet," I said, carefully testing the waters. "He ate something bad." "Oh no," she said, and her eyes flickered for a fraction of a second. Not sadness. Calculation. Did they say what it was? I looked at her. I looked at the woman I had welcomed into my home. The woman who called me death. "No," I lied. "They think it was a spider bite. That night she brought me my applesauce with the blue powder mixed in." "Here you go, Dad," she said, smiling. "This will help you rest." I took the bowl. I thanked her. I went to my room and locked the door. I went into the bathroom and flushed the applesauce down the toilet. I did not sleep that night. For the first time in months, my brain began to clear. The withdrawal was unpleasant. I had the shakes and a headache that felt like a drill bit behind my eyes. But by 3 a.m., the cotton wool was lifting. I could think. I could remember. And then I heard the noise. It was a soft scratching sound coming from my home office down the hall. I crept out of bed. I did not turn on the lights. I moved through the darkness with the muscle memory of 30 years living in that house. The floorboards creaked, but I knew which ones to avoid. I reached the office door, which was slightly ajar. A beam of flashlight cut through the gloom. I peered inside. Jason was sitting on the floor, surrounded by my personal files. He had my shredder bin dumped out on the carpet. He was piecing together strips of paper I had shredded months ago. Bank statements, investment summaries. He was not looking for a will. He was looking for account numbers. He was muttering to himself, typing furiously into his tablet. "Come on, you old miser," he whispered, his face illuminated by the harsh blue light of the screen. "Where did you hide the main trust fund access code?" I stood there in the shadows, watching my son rob me. The grief was a physical blow to the gut. But I forced it down. Grief is useless in a crash landing. I needed a flight plan. I silently backed away. I went back to my room. I reached under the sofa cushion where I had started hiding the blue pills wrapped in tissue. I had a stockpile now. Evidence. I lay in bed staring at the ceiling until the sun came up. They thought I was a senile old man losing his mind. They thought the drugs had turned me into a compliant vegetable. They were wrong. The drugs had only put the pilot to sleep. But the pilot was awake now, and he was very, very angry. The next morning I shuffled into the kitchen, dragging my feet, acting confused. I asked Megan what day it was. I saw them exchange that look of triumph. They thought they had won. They had no idea that behind my vacant stare, I was recording every move they made. I was not just watching. I was gathering ammunition, and I would not fire until I had a clear shot at the target. This was no longer a family home. It was a battlefield. And I knew the terrain better than they ever would. The appointment was scheduled for a Thursday afternoon, just 3 days after I had discovered the truth about the blue pills. Jason drove me to the clinic in his brand-new Audi, a car I knew he had paid for, with the first unauthorized withdrawal from my retirement account. I sat in the passenger seat watching the gray Denver skyline roll by, and I felt like a prisoner being transported to a black site. Jason was nervous. He kept tapping his fingers on the steering wheel and glancing at me sideways. "Dad, you are going to like Dr. Thorne," he said, his voice tight with false cheer. "He is a specialist. Megan says he is the best in the state." I said nothing. I just stared out the window and let my mouth hang open slightly. I was practicing. If they wanted a senile old man, I was going to give them a performance worthy of a standing ovation. We pulled up to a glass and steel building in Cherry Creek, the kind of place that smells of money and antiseptic. We took the elevator to the 4th floor. The waiting room was silent except for the hum of an expensive air purifier. Megan was already there waiting for us. She stood up when we walked in and gave me a hug that felt like a constrictor snake testing its prey. "Hi, Harry," she cooed, smoothing down my collar. "You look tired. This will be good for you. We just want to make sure you are healthy." I let her guide me to a chair. I shuffled my feet. I looked confused. But inside my jacket pocket, my hand was resting on a small digital voice recorder. I had bought it 20 years ago to record pilot briefings. It was old, but the microphone was sensitive enough to pick up a whisper at 10 feet. I slid the switch to the on position. The red light was covered by black tape. The tape was rolling. Dr. Eris Thorne came out 5 minutes later. He was a tall man with a perfect tan and teeth that were too white. He did not look like a doctor, he looked like a salesman. He shook Jason's hand with the familiarity of a co-conspirator. "Mr. Bennett," he said, looking at me, not with compassion, but with assessment. "Come on back." The examination room was cold. Thorne sat behind a large mahogany desk and placed a folder in front of him. He did not open it. He just stared at me for a long moment. Jason and Megan sat in the corner chairs like vultures on a fence. So Harry Thorne started, his voice dripping with condescension. "Your family tells me you have been having some trouble with your memory. Can you tell me what year it is?" I looked at him. I looked at the calendar on the wall behind him, which clearly displayed the current year. I knew exactly what day it was. I knew the barometric pressure outside, and I knew the flight schedule for the outbound planes passing overhead. But I blinked slowly. I furrowed my brow. "It is 1998, I said softly. I heard Jason let out a breath that sounded like relief. Thorne made a note on his pad. "I see," Thorne said. "And can you tell me who the President of the United States is?" I paused. I looked at my hands. I picked at a loose thread on my trousers. "Clinton," I mumbled. "It is Bill Clinton." Megan made a sad, tisking sound in the corner. "Oh, Harry," she whispered loud enough for the doctor to hear. "It has gotten so much worse this week." Thorne stood up and walked around the desk. He held up a pen. "Follow this with your eyes, Harry. Don't move your head." I let my eyes wander. I let them drift away from the pen to the window, then back to the floor. I acted as if I could not focus. I acted as if my brain was a broken circuit board. Thorne leaned back against his desk and crossed his arms. He looked at Jason. "It is classic progression. The disorientation, the temporal displacement, the inability to track objects. It is advancing rapidly." He turned back to me. "Harry, I am going to say 3 words to you. I want you to repeat them back to me. Are you ready?" I nodded slowly. "Apple, table, penny." I stared at him. "Can you repeat them, Harry?" "Apple," I said. Then I stopped. I looked around the room. I looked at Jason. "Train," I said. Thorne shook his head. "No, Harry. Table and penny." "I don't have any pennies," I said, my voice rising in fake agitation. "Did you take my money?" Jason took my money. This was a calculated risk. I needed to sound paranoid. Paranoia is a key symptom of the diagnosis they wanted. I saw Jason stiffen, but Thorne just nodded. Paranoid delusions, Thorne said to Megan. That tracks with what you told me on the phone. He feels persecuted. Thorne spent the next 20 minutes putting me through a battery of cognitive tests. I failed them all. I drew a clock face with the numbers all jumbled on one side. I failed to subtract 7 from 100. I pretended to forget my own date of birth. It was humiliating. Every wrong answer was a dagger to my pride. I was a man who used to calculate fuel consumption rates in my head while landing 3 planes simultaneously. Now I was playing the fool to save my life. But I kept my hand near my pocket, ensuring the recorder was not blocked by the fabric. Finally, Thorne seemed satisfied. He walked back to his desk and started writing on a prescription pad. I think we have seen enough, he said. The decline is severe. He is not capable of making his own financial or medical decisions. I am going to recommend immediate conservatorship. He tore the sheet off the pad. But we need to manage his behavior in the meantime. The aggression and the wandering are dangerous. I decided it was time to play my ace. I let my head drop to my chest. I let my breathing become heavy and rhythmic. I let my mouth fall open. I pretended to fall asleep right there in the chair, exhausted by the mental effort. He is out, Jason said, his voice losing the fake concern. Jesus, he is like a toddler. Thorne chuckled. It is the disease, Jason. The brain just shuts down. There was a moment of silence. I focused every neuron on my hearing. I needed them to speak freely. Megan spoke first. Her voice was low, businesslike. The hearing is next week, Eris. We need to make sure he is like this in front of the judge. If he has a lucid moment, he could ruin everything. Thorne walked over to them. I could hear his footsteps on the tile. Do not worry, Thorne said, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. The cocktail I prescribed is aggressive. The scopolamine combined with the high-dose antipsychotics will keep his short-term memory from forming. He is essentially a recording device with no tape. Is it safe? Megan asked. I mean, safe enough. We don't want him dying before the transfer is complete. He won't die, Thorne assured them. But he will be pliable. This dosage will keep him in a state of confusion for about 6 months. 6 months, Jason said. That is plenty of time. We can liquidate the portfolio and sell the house in 3. Just make sure he takes the pills, Thorne said. Crush them if you have to. If he stops taking them, he might have rebound clarity. And you do not want him waking up in front of a probate judge. He won't stop, Jason said. He eats whatever we put in front of him. I sat there, eyes closed, listening to them plan the theft of my life. I listened to the doctor who had sworn an oath to do no harm instruct my son on how to chemically lobotomize me. It took every ounce of my discipline not to open my eyes and strangle them. But I did not move. I waited until Thorne shook their hands and walked them to the door. Wake him up, Thorne said. Get him home. I will fax the report to your lawyer in the morning. Jason shook my shoulder roughly. Dad, wake up. We are done. I opened my eyes and blinked groggily. Did we go to the airport yet? I asked. Jason rolled his eyes. No, Dad. We are going home. Come on. The ride home was silent, but the atmosphere had changed. Jason and Megan were relaxed. They turned on the radio and sang along to a pop song. They thought the heavy lifting was done. They thought they had the golden ticket. I sat in the back seat, clutching my jacket tight around me. I felt the hard plastic of the recorder against my ribs. It was the heaviest thing I had ever carried. When we got home, I went straight to my room. I told them I needed a nap. They were happy to let me go. As soon as the door clicked shut, I moved with a speed that would have shocked them. I pulled the recorder out. I put on my headphones and pressed play. The audio was crystal clear. I heard my own fake confusion. I heard the clock test. And then I heard it. The whisper. He is essentially a recording device with no tape. 6 months. Liquidate the portfolio. I had the smoking gun. But a gun is useless if it gets jammed. I knew I could not keep the evidence on just one device. If they found the recorder, it was over. I went to my closet and pulled out my old laptop, the one I kept hidden in a shoebox of winter boots. I did not turn on the Wi-Fi. I connected the recorder via a cable. My hands were steady now. I transferred the file. I named it flight_plan_747.mp3 to make it look innocuous. Then I reached into my desk drawer where I kept a stash of blank USB drives. I plugged them in one by one. Copy, paste, verify. Copy, paste, verify. I had 3 copies. Now I needed 3 hiding spots. I took the first USB drive. I walked into the bathroom. I unscrewed the bottom of my electric toothbrush charger. There was a small hollow space near the battery. I wrapped the drive in a piece of plastic wrap and shoved it inside. I screwed the cover back on. I took the second drive. I went to the bookshelf. I pulled out a thick, hardcover copy of The History of Aviation. I opened it to page 300. I used a razor blade to carefully cut a small rectangle out of the inner binding spine. I slid the drive in and glued the spine back down. Unless you ripped the book apart, you would never feel it. The third drive was the insurance policy, the one I would need if I ever got out of this house. I went to the kitchen. Megan was in the living room watching TV. I moved quietly. I opened the pantry. I found a box of dog biscuits we kept for the neighbor's dog who sometimes visited. I took a large biscuit. I used a small knife to bore a hole in the side. I pushed the tiny drive inside and plugged the hole with a mixture of flour and water, rubbing it to blend the texture. I put the biscuit back at the bottom of the box. I went back to my room and erased the file from the recorder. I put the recorder back in my jacket. I sat down on the edge of the bed. My heart was pounding, but my mind was clear. They had their diagnosis. They had their timeline. But I had their voices. The medical trap had been sprung, but they didn't realize that they were the ones caught in it. I looked at the mirror. The old man looking back at me didn't look confused anymore. He looked like a soldier preparing for a counterattack. The war had officially begun. The house was silent, but it was the silence of a graveyard, not a home. I sat in my darkened office with a towel rolled up at the base of the door to block any light from escaping into the hallway. My hands hovered over the keyboard of my old desktop computer. To Jason and Megan, this machine was a dinosaur just like me. They thought because it didn't have a touch screen or voice command, it was obsolete. They did not understand that the command line interface was the most powerful tool in the world if you knew the language. And I knew the language. For 30 years, I managed the flow of millions of lives through the sky, using screens that looked like primitive video games to the untrained eye. Accessing a standard residential Wi-Fi router was not hacking to me. It was like opening a door with a key that had been left under the mat. I brought up the command terminal. The glowing green cursor blinked at me like a heartbeat. I typed in the local IP address of the router. The login screen appeared. I tried the default admin password first. Access granted. I almost laughed out loud. Jason, the so-called modern tech-savvy investor, had not even bothered to change the factory settings on the network security. It was the digital equivalent of leaving the front door wide open with a neon sign pointing to the safe. I navigated to the Connected Devices tab. I saw 3 active connections: my desktop, Jason's laptop, and Megan's tablet. I went to the traffic logs. I started with Jason. I needed to understand the financial pressure that was driving him. People do not wake up one morning and decide to drug their fathers for money unless there is a fire burning behind them. I filtered the traffic by his device ID. What I saw was a roadmap of desperation. The logs were an endless scroll of gambling sites and high-risk crypto trading platforms. I saw connections to offshore casinos that operated in legal gray zones. I saw hours spent on sites with names like Moonshot Shot Coin and Leverage King. He wasn't trading. He was betting. He was chasing losses. I cross-referenced the timestamps with the dates of the withdrawals he had forged from my checking account. The pattern was undeniable. Every time he stole $1,000 from me, it was gone within an hour, swallowed whole by the internet. He was hemorrhaging money. He was drowning, and he had decided to use my life savings as his life raft. It was pathetic, but it was not evil. It was the weakness of a man who wanted a shortcut to success. I could almost forgive the greed. Almost. But then I switched the filter to Megan's tablet. The air in my office seemed to drop 10 degrees. Megan's search history was not about money. It was about biology. It was about the fragile mechanics of the human body. I scrolled through the queries she had typed into the search bar over the last 2 weeks. My stomach twisted into a knot of cold iron. How to induce confusion in elderly patients naturally. Interaction between lisinopril and scopolamine. Symptoms of heavy metal poisoning versus dementia. Legal requirements for cremation in Colorado. How fast can a body be cremated after death without autopsy? I stopped scrolling. I leaned back in my chair and stared at the ceiling. I focused on my breathing. In, out. In, out. Do not panic. Analyze. This was not a robbery. This was an assassination plot. The realization hit me with the force of a jet engine blast. They did not just want my money. They wanted me gone. They knew that as long as I was alive, there was a risk. A risk I might wake up. A risk I might call a lawyer. A risk I might change my will. The only way to secure the asset permanently was to remove the owner. The plan was clear. Drug me into a state of incompetence. Get the conservatorship. Liquidate the assets. And then let the dementia take its natural course. A little too much medication one night. A fall down the stairs. Or simply letting my heart give out under the strain of the toxic cocktail they were feeding me. And with the cremation searches, it was clear they planned to burn the evidence before anyone thought to ask questions. I looked at my hands. They were the hands of a man who had built a life of honor. A man who had raised a son to be better than this. Somewhere along the way I had failed. Or maybe Jason was just broken. It didn't matter anymore. The son I loved was gone. The man sleeping down the hall was a stranger who wanted me dead. I needed to know the timeline. I needed to know when the hammer was going to drop. I cleared the browser cache on my computer and shut it down. I needed physical evidence. I crept out of my office and into the hallway. The floorboards groaned under my weight, and I froze waiting for a door to open. Silence. I moved toward the guest room which they had turned into their base of operations. The door was ajar. I pushed it open inch by inch. The room smelled of stale pizza and expensive cologne. It was a mess. Clothes were thrown over the chairs and empty energy drink cans littered the desk. This was the chaos of their lives. I moved to the desk. I did not turn on the light. I used the small pen light I kept in my pocket, shielding the beam with my fingers, so only a sliver of light escaped. I sifted through the piles of paper. Credit card bills. Final notices. A foreclosure warning for their old house. And then I saw it. A thick envelope tucked under a stack of gaming magazines. It had a legal seal on the corner. I pulled it out. My heart hammered against my ribs. It was a court summons. But it wasn't for a court in Denver. It was for the King County Superior Court in Seattle, Washington. I stared at the location. Why Seattle? Then it clicked. My commercial property. 30 years ago, I had invested in a rundown warehouse district in Seattle. That area was now a tech hub. That building was the most valuable thing I owned, worth millions more than my house in Denver. Jason knew that. He was targeting the big prize. I read the document. It was a motion for an emergency ex parte conservatorship. The hearing was scheduled for next Tuesday at 2 p.m. Emergency ex parte. I knew what that meant. It meant a hearing without the other party present. It was reserved for extreme cases where the person was a danger to themselves. Jason was going to stand in front of a judge in Seattle, 1,000 miles away from where I was trapped, and tell them I was insane. He would show them the forged medical report from Dr. Thorne. He would tell them I was too sick to travel, and without me there to defend myself, the judge would sign the order. Once he had that signature, he legally became me. He could sell the building. He could empty the accounts. He could sign a do not resuscitate order at the hospital. I checked the date. Today was Friday. The hearing was Tuesday. I had 4 days. If I stayed in this house, I was a dead man. If I tried to drive to Seattle, they would track my phone or report the car stolen. If I tried to book a flight using my credit card, they would see the transaction alert immediately. I put the paper back exactly how I found it. I smoothed the edge of the magazine cover to match the dust outline. I backed out of the room. I went back to my bed, but I did not sleep. I lay there in the dark, listening to the wind rattle the window pane. I felt a strange sense of calm settle over me. It was the calm of the control tower during a storm. I knew the variables, I knew the threat, and I knew the destination. I had to get to Seattle. I had to stand in that courtroom and look my son in the eye. But I had to do it without them knowing I had ever left the house. It was an impossible flight plan. But impossible was what I did best. I closed my eyes and started visualizing the route. I would need cash. I would need a burner phone. And I would need to act the part of the confused old man for just a few more days. They wanted a vegetable. I would give them a vegetable until I became the executioner. The war for my life had just moved from the shadows to the runway, and I was cleared for takeoff. The door to the interrogation room opened, and the air pressure seemed to shift. Sergeant Miller walked back in, but he looked different. Gone was the swagger of the lawman who had just caught a terrorist. In its place was the slumped posture of a man who had just realized he was the weapon used in a crime he did not understand. He did not look at me at first. He looked at the wall, then at his boots. Finally, he met my eyes, and I saw a mixture of embarrassment and cold fury. He walked over to the table and unlocked the handcuffs. The mechanism clicked and the metal fell away. I rubbed my wrists, feeling the blood rush back into my fingers. "You were right," Miller said, his voice rough. "The cell tower data just came back. The call originated from a residential tower on Alameda Avenue. The IP address for the 911 call matches the one your son uses for his home internet. He wasn't at the airport. He was sitting on his couch drinking coffee while he sent a SWAT team to take down his own father." I stood up slowly. My knees popped, but I ignored the pain. I did not need an apology. I needed a runway. "I am free to go, then?" I asked. Miller nodded. "You are free to go. And Mr. Bennett, I am going to issue a warrant for your son's arrest for filing a false report and misuse of emergency services. We will pick him up." "That is good to hear, Sergeant," I said, checking my watch. "But right now, picking him up does not help me. It is 9:45. My flight left 45 minutes ago. I have a court hearing in Seattle at 2 o'clock. If I am not in that room when the gavel bangs, my son wins. He doesn't need to be free to steal my money. He just needs me to be absent." I walked out of the room and Miller followed me. We emerged into the busy terminal. The noise hit me like a physical wave. I pulled out my phone, which Miller had returned to me. I opened the flight tracker app. My fingers flew across the screen with the speed that used to save lives. I scanned the departures. United to Seattle full. Delta to Seattle delayed 3 hours due to maintenance. Alaska Airlines fully booked. There was nothing. The next available seat on a commercial flight that would get me there before the courthouse closed was tomorrow morning. I stopped in the middle of the concourse. People flowed around me like water around a stone. I felt a cold pit open in my stomach. Jason had won. He had calculated this perfectly. Even if the lie fell apart, it held me up long enough to destroy me. Miller looked at the departure board over my shoulder. He did the math too. I can get you a police escort to the city limits, Miller offered. Maybe you can drive. I shook my head. It is a 20-hour drive. I have 4 hours. It is over. I stared at the tarmac through the massive glass windows. I saw the planes lining up for takeoff. Aluminum tubes filled with people going places. And I was stuck here grounded by a lie. Then I saw it. It was a logo on the tail of a massive Boeing 777 freighter taxiing slowly toward the cargo apron. A blue globe with a golden wing. Global Air Logistics. A memory flashed in my mind. 20 years ago, a stormy night at O'Hare, a Global Air cargo pilot named Tom Sterling had lost both engines on approach due to a bird strike. The tower was in chaos. Everyone was screaming. I was the one who stayed on the radio. I was the one who calculated his glide ratio. I was the one who cleared a path through 3 lanes of traffic and guided him to a safe landing on the longest runway we had. Tom had found me at the bar 3 days later. He was shaking. He bought me a whiskey and gave me a card. He said, if you ever need to move something anywhere in the world, you call me. Tom Sterling was now the chief operating officer of Global Air. I pulled out my phone. My hands were trembling slightly, not from age but from adrenaline. I searched for the number. It was a long shot. He might have changed it. He might be retired. He might not remember me. I dialed. It rang. 1 ring. 2 rings. 3 rings. This is Sterling, a gruff voice answered. Tom, I said. This is Harry Bennett, O'Hare Tower, night of the double bird strike. There was a silence on the other end, a silence that stretched for 5 seconds. Harry the ghost. Bennett, the voice boomed. My God. I haven't heard that voice since you talked me out of a nosedive. Is everything okay? I need to cash in the chip. Tom, I said, cutting straight to the chase. I am at Denver International. I have a court hearing in Seattle in 4 hours. My son set me up. I missed my commercial flight. If I don't get there, I lose everything. I saw the Global Air jet on the tarmac holding short of the runway. I see a 777 with your tail number painted on it, taxiing for departure, I said. Flight 409. Tell me it is going to Seattle. Tom didn't ask for details. He didn't ask why the police were involved or why I was desperate. He just reacted. He was a pilot. He knew what an emergency sounded like. Hold on, Tom said. I hear keyboard clacking in the background. Yeah, that is the 409 Heavy, carrying perishables to SeaTac. She is second in line for takeoff. I need on that plane, Tom, I said. Harry, that is a cargo flight. It is not insured for passengers. The FAA would have my head, would have my Tom. I said, my voice cracking just a little. They are trying to declare me insane. They are trying to take my life away. I saved yours. Please, save mine. The silence returned. Then I heard a sigh. Go to gate C45, Tom said. It is the service access for the tarmac. I am calling the captain now. I will tell him to hold his position. Do not be late, Harry, or I will lose my license. I hung up. I looked at Miller. I have a flight, I said, but it is on the cargo apron. I need to get through the security doors at gate C45, and I need a ride to the plane. Miller didn't hesitate. He grabbed his radio. Dispatch, this is Miller. I have a civilian emergency transport. I am taking a squad car onto the AOA. Clear a path to the Global Air hardstand. Follow me, Miller shouted, and he started running. I ran with him. For a 75-year-old man with bad knees, I moved like a sprinter. We dodged passengers. We jumped over luggage. We burst through the emergency exit doors at gate C45, triggering an alarm that Miller silenced with his badge. A police cruiser was waiting at the bottom of the stairs. We jumped in. Miller slammed on the gas. The sirens wailed as we sped across the tarmac. It was a surreal experience. To my left, a Southwest 737 was pushing back. To my right, baggage carts were scattering. We were tearing down the service road at 60 miles an hour. "There it is," Miller pointed. The massive Boeing 777 was sitting there, engines humming a low growl that vibrated in my chest. The mobile stairs were already pulled away. The door was closed. Miller grabbed the PA microphone in the car. "Flight 409, hold your departure. Police emergency." We screeched to a halt under the nose of the giant plane. The cockpit window slid open. A pilot looked down, looking confused. Miller jumped out. "Open the access hatch. We have your passenger." The pilot disappeared. A moment later, a small hatch in the belly of the plane opened, and a ladder extended down. I climbed out of the car. The smell of jet fuel was overpowering. The wind whipped my thinning hair. I turned to Miller. "Thank you, Sergeant," I said. "You didn't have to do this." Miller looked at me. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a card. "This is my personal cell. When you get to that courthouse and you nail that son of a bitch, you call me. I want to be the one to put the cuffs on him." I nodded. "I will." I climbed the ladder. It was steep and narrow. I pulled myself up into the belly of the beast. The cargo hold was freezing. It was packed floor to ceiling with crates labeled live seafood and perishable. The smell of ocean and ice filled the air. A flight engineer helped me up the final step. He looked at my suit. He looked at the crates of lobsters. "Welcome aboard, Mr. Bennett," he shouted over the engine noise. "The boss says you can take the jump seat in the cockpit, but if the FOA asks, you are a cargo inspector." I nodded and made my way forward to the flight deck. The captain turned around as I strapped myself into the small observer seat behind him. "Sterling says you are a legend," the captain said, checking his instruments. "He says you can calculate a fuel load in your head faster than the flight computer." "I used to," I said, buckling the harness tight. "Now I just want to get to Seattle." The captain spoke into his headset. "Tower Global 409 Heavy ready for departure. We have our cargo secured." I closed my eyes as the engines roared to full power. The plane shuddered and began to roll. I felt the familiar G-force pressing me back into the seat. We lifted off, leaving Denver behind. Leaving the lies behind. I looked down at the shrinking city. Somewhere down there in that maze of streets was my house. My son was probably there right now, popping champagne, thinking he had won. He thought I was in a cell. He thought I was helpless. He had no idea that I was currently climbing to 30,000 feet in a flying freezer, traveling at 500 miles an hour toward his destruction. I pulled my laptop out of my bag. I had 3 hours of flight time. I had no internet, but I had my files. I had the affidavit I needed to write. I had the timeline I needed to construct. The flight engineer handed me a cup of terrible instant coffee. "Comfort level 0, the captain joked. "It is the best flight of my life," I replied, opening a blank document. I began to type. The cursor blinked steady and relentless. Every keystroke was a bullet. Every paragraph was a strategy. I was not just an old man anymore. I was the controller, and I was about to guide my son's life into a controlled crash landing. The lobsters and I were coming to Seattle, and we were bringing the cold with us. The Boeing 777 is a magnificent machine, but inside the cargo hold at 30,000 feet, it feels less like a plane and more like a flying refrigerator. The temperature hovers just above freezing to keep the perishable cargo fresh, and the roar of the engines is a constant physical assault on the eardrums. I sat strapped into the jump seat behind Captain Reynolds. My laptop balanced precariously on my knees. My breath formed small clouds of condensation in the air every time I exhaled. Most men my age would be freezing or terrified, but I felt neither cold nor fear. I felt the burning clarity of a man who finally has the coordinates for his target. The cockpit was dimly lit by the glow of the instrument panels, a sea of amber and green lights that had been my entire world for 3 decades. This was my office. This was my sanctuary. And now it was my war room. I opened my laptop. The screen flickered to life, casting a harsh blue light on my tired face. I had paid for the expensive in-flight satellite Wi-Fi connection, using a credit card I had hidden in my sock years ago for emergencies. It was slow, but it was steady. I created a new folder on my desktop and named it simply The Truth. I began the painful process of dragging and dropping the fragments of my son's betrayal into this digital evidence locker. First came the financial records. I pulled up the screenshots I had taken from the router logs, the gambling sites, the crypto exchanges. The pattern was a staircase leading down to hell. March 3rd, $2,000. March 4th, 0. March 10th, $5,000. March 11th, 0. It was the mathematical proof of an addiction that had consumed his soul. I looked at the numbers and I forced myself to see them not as money lost, but as the price he had put on his father's life. He had sold me out for a chance to spin a digital roulette wheel. Next came the medical evidence. I uploaded the audio file from Dr. Thorne's office. I put on my headset and listened to it one last time to ensure the quality was perfect. The sound of my own feigned confusion followed by the sharp whisper of the doctor. He is essentially a recording device with no tape. I typed out a transcript timestamping every word. I wanted the judge to read it while they listened. I wanted there to be no ambiguity. This was not malpractice. This was conspiracy to commit bodily harm. Then came the search history. This was the hardest part. Seeing the words cremation without autopsy and heavy metal poisoning symptoms in black and white made my hands shake. It is one thing to know your child is greedy. It is another to know he has researched how to dispose of your corpse. I took a deep breath of the recycled air and forced my fingers to keep typing. I was not a father right now. I was an investigator. I organized the searches by date, showing how the intent to kill had escalated as their financial situation worsened. Finally, I opened a Word document to draft my affidavit. An affidavit is a sworn statement of fact used as evidence in court. It has to be precise. It has to be unemotional. It has to be the truth. I began to type. I, Harrison James Bennett, being of sound mind and body, do hereby declare. I wrote about the pills. I wrote about the fake diagnosis. I wrote about the isolation. I wrote with the cold precision of an air traffic controller filing an accident report. I did not use adjectives. I used verbs and nouns. On April 4th, Jason Bennett replaced my prescribed lisinopril with an unknown blue compound. On April 6th, I experienced designated symptoms of sedation. I was halfway through page 4 when the plane lurched violently to the left. The laptop slid across my knees, and I barely caught it. The coffee cup in the center console jumped, spilling dark liquid. The cockpit suddenly felt very small. Clear air turbulence, Captain Reynolds shouted, fighting the yoke. "We just hit a pocket! Autopilot is disengaged." The plane dropped. My stomach rose into my throat. It wasn't a small drop. It was a 1,000-foot plunge in 3 seconds. The altitude alarm started blaring. Whoop, whoop, pull up. I looked at the weather radar screen in the center of the console. It was painted with angry splotches of red and magenta. We had flown straight into the edge of a developing squall line over Idaho. Reynolds was wrestling with the controls, his knuckles white. "We need to climb," he yelled to his co-pilot. "Request flight level 380. I looked at the radar again. I saw what they couldn't see because they were focused on the immediate shaking. I saw the storm cell development pattern. I had watched storms like this for 30 years over the Rockies. They were trying to climb over it, but the cell was building vertically faster than a heavy cargo plane could climb. If they went up, they would fly right into the anvil of the storm, where the hail was the size of baseballs. "Don't climb," I said, my voice cutting through the panic in the cockpit. Reynolds ignored me. "Center, This is Global 409 requesting immediate climb to 380 due to severe turbulence. Negative, Ghost Rider. I said louder, unbuckling my shoulder harness so I could lean forward. Look at the velocity vector on the cell. It is topping out at 40,000. You will never clear it with this payload. You will stall before you get over the top. Reynolds turned his head, his eyes wide. What do you suggest, Mr. Bennett? I pointed at a thin sliver of green between two massive red blobs on the radar. It looked like a suicide gap, but I knew storm dynamics. That was a pressure trough. Bank left heading 260, I said, calm and authoritative. Drop to flight level 280. Go under the shelf. The air is stable there. You will catch the tailwind from the outflow boundary. Reynolds hesitated. Dropping altitude in turbulence went against every instinct. Trust me, Captain, I said. I guided a crippled DC-10 through a microburst in 89 using this exact vector. 260, drop 5,000. Do it. Reynolds looked at his co-pilot. Then he nodded. Center Global 409 amending request. Descending to 280, heading 260. He pushed the nose down. The plane shuddered as we descended into the darker clouds. The rain hammered against the windshield, sounding like gravel. The shaking was violent. My teeth rattled in my skull. Steady, I whispered, watching the altimeter unwind. 300, 290, wait for it. We hit 280. Suddenly the shaking stopped. It was instantaneous. 1 second we were in a washing machine, the next we were gliding on glass. The air down here was smooth, compressed by the storm above. And then I felt the push. The airspeed indicator jumped. We had caught the outflow jet stream just like I predicted. Ground speed increasing, Reynolds said, his voice filled with awe. We picked up 60 knots. I sat back in my jump seat and buckled my harness. That is the express lane, Captain, I said. You just saved us 20 minutes and a lot of broken lobster claws. Reynolds looked back at me and grinned. Remind me to never argue with a controller, he said. Even a retired one. I turned back to my laptop. The adrenaline had cleared the last remnants of fatigue from my mind. I felt sharp. I felt dangerous. I finished the affidavit. I saved it as a PDF. I organized the files into a single encrypted zip folder. I named it the _hammer. I looked out the window. The clouds were breaking. Below us, the rugged coastline of the Pacific Northwest was coming into view. The gray waters of the Puget Sound glittered in the afternoon light. And there in the distance was the Space Needle standing like a beacon. Seattle. I checked the flight computer. Estimated time of arrival 1:45 p.m. The hearing was at 2. Because of the shortcut through the storm, we were 15 minutes early. Those 15 minutes were everything. They were the difference between rushing into the courtroom breathless and disorganized or walking in with the slow, deliberate pace of a man who owns the room. I closed my laptop. I put it in my bag. I smoothed my tie. We began our final approach. The landing gear deployed with a heavy thud. The flaps extended. The city rose up to meet us. I watched the runway rush closer. It was a strip of concrete that represented the end of the journey and the beginning of the fight. My son was down there. He was probably parking his car right now, checking his hair in the mirror, rehearsing his sad face for the judge. He thought he was walking into a funeral. He didn't know he was walking into an execution. The wheels touched down with a screech of burning rubber. The reverse thrusters roared, slowing the massive beast. We taxied off the active runway. Reynolds taxied us straight to the cargo terminal where a black sedan was waiting on the tarmac. Sergeant Miller had called ahead. I unbuckled my seatbelt. I shook Captain Reynolds' hand. Good landing, Captain, I said. Good navigation, Mr. Bennett, he replied. Go give them hell. I climbed down the ladder into the cool, damp air of Seattle. I took a deep breath. It smelled of rain and pine and justice. I walked toward the waiting car, my bag heavy on my shoulder. but my step light. The war room was closed, the court was in session, and the plaintiff was about to become the defendant. The black sedan tore out of the cargo terminal onto the wet highway that leads toward downtown Seattle. The rain here was different from the storms in Colorado. It was a relentless gray sheet that blurred the world into streaks of silver and charcoal. I sat in the back seat leaning forward as if my willpower alone could make the car move faster. The driver was a man named Khalid, sent by Captain Reynolds, and he drove with the quiet intensity of a professional. He wove through the heavy afternoon traffic, finding gaps where none seemed to exist. I watched the speedometer climb. 70, 80. We were breaking every traffic law in the state, but I did not care. The only law that mattered right now was the law of physics. Time and distance were my enemies, and I was fighting a losing battle against the clock on the dashboard. It was 1:45. The hearing had started 15 minutes ago. In my mind, I could see the inside of that courtroom as clearly as if I were watching it on a surveillance monitor. I knew my son. I knew his tells. I knew his script. Jason was not an improviser, he was a rehearsed actor. He had likely spent the last week practicing his sorrow in front of a mirror, perfecting the tremble in his voice and the slump of his shoulders. He would not be the arrogant gambler who mocked me in my own kitchen. Today he would be the devoted, heartbroken son carrying the heavy burden of a father gone mad. I imagined the scene unfolding in courtroom 3B of the King County Superior Court. The room would be hushed, smelling of furniture polish and old paper. The Honorable Judge Eleanor Vance would be sitting high on her bench, peering over her reading glasses. She was known for being fair, but she was also known for being efficient. She had a docket full of cases, and she wanted to move things along. And in front of her stood the performance of a lifetime. Jason would be standing at the plaintiff's table dabbing his eyes with a handkerchief. He would be wearing his best dark suit, the one I bought him for his wedding 5 years ago. He would look small. He would look vulnerable. Your Honor, Jason would say, his voice cracking just enough to sound authentic. This is the hardest day of my life. My father, Harrison Bennett, is my hero. He spent 30 years keeping people safe in the sky. To see him like this, to see him reduced to a confused, wandering shell of a man, it breaks my heart, breaks. He would pause there, letting the silence do the work for him. He knew that silence made people uncomfortable, and their instinct would be to fill it with sympathy. He ran away this morning. Your Honor, Jason would continue. I tried to stop him. I tried to keep him safe at home, but he became violent. He was screaming about conspiracies and people trying to kill him. He took a bag and just ran out into traffic. We found out later he went to the airport. He tried to board a plane with a device the police thought was a bomb. That was the masterstroke, using the very trap he set for me as evidence of my insanity. The judge would not know the company was fake or that the police had cleared me. All she would hear was that a 75-year-old man had caused a security incident at a major international airport, to a rational mind that screams dementia. I could see Megan sitting beside him, nodding solemnly. She would be dressed conservatively, playing the part of the concerned medical professional. When the judge turned to her for clarification, Megan would be ready. Mrs. Bennett, the judge would ask, "You are a pharmacist, is that correct? Can you speak to his medical condition?" Megan would stand up, smoothing her skirt. She would project an air of clinical detachment mixed with family concern. "Yes, Your Honor. I have been managing Harry's medication for 6 months. Despite our best efforts, his cognitive decline has been rapid and severe. He suffers from advanced paranoid delusions and significant short-term memory loss. He often forgets who we are. He forgets his own name." She would then produce the documents. The forgery from Dr. Thorne. She would slide the folder across the polished wood table. "This is the report from his psychiatrist, Dr. Thorne," Megan would say. "As you can see, the prognosis is grim. Harry requires 24-hour supervision. He is a danger to himself and others. We have found a specialized memory care facility here in Washington that can take him, but we cannot admit him without the conservatorship. We cannot access his funds to pay for his care without your signature. That was the hook. They were not asking for the money for themselves. Oh no. They were asking for the money to help me, to pay for the nursing home that would become my prison. It was evil wrapped in the guise of charity. In the taxi, I gripped the door handle until my knuckles turned white. We were passing the stadium now. The skyline of downtown Seattle rose up like a fortress of glass and steel. "Faster, Khalid," I whispered. "I am doing my best, Mr. Bennett," Khalid replied, swerving around a delivery truck. "The rain is bad." I checked my phone. 1:55. Back in the courtroom, the narrative would be shifting from medical to financial. This was the part where their lawyer would step in. A man named Silas Stone. I had looked him up on the plane. He was a shark in an expensive suit, a specialist in elder law, who knew exactly which buttons to push to expedite a ruling. "Your Honor," Mr. Stone would say, stepping forward, "we understand that an emergency ex parte order is an extreme measure. However, the situation is critical. Mr. Bennett is currently missing. He is confused, and he has access to bank accounts containing significant assets. In his delusional state, he is vulnerable to scammers. He could drain his life savings in an hour." Stone would pull out a stack of papers. These were the fake financial records Jason had concocted, the ones showing erratic withdrawals and reckless spending. "We have evidence here that Mr. Bennett has already lost thousands of dollars to online scams," Stone would lie. "He believes he is investing in foreign currency, but in reality, he is sending money into a black hole. If we do not freeze these assets immediately, there will be nothing left to pay for his medical care." The judge would look at the papers. She would see the numbers. She would see the medical report. She would look at the crying son and the professional daughter-in-law. She would see a family trying to save their patriarch from his own deteriorating mind. She would not see the wolves. She would see the sheep. I can hear the judge sighing, the weight of the decision resting on her shoulders. "It is a tragedy," she would say. "Mr. Bennett sounds like he was a remarkable man. It is devastating to see such a decline." Jason would sniffle loudly. "Thank you, Your Honor. We just want him safe. We just want to bring him home." The car screeched around a corner. The courthouse was in sight. It was a gray, imposing building that looked like it was carved out of the same granite as a tombstone. "Pull up to the front," I shouted. "Don't worry about parking." Khalid slammed on the brakes in the loading zone. I threw a $100 bill onto the front seat, not waiting for change. I opened the door before the car had fully stopped. The rain hit me instantly, soaking my shirt, but I didn't feel it. I ran. I ran up the wet concrete steps, taking them two at a time. My heart was hammering against my ribs, a frantic rhythm that felt like it might burst through my chest. I burst through the revolving doors into the lobby. Security. Of course. I had to go through the metal detector. I threw my bag onto the belt. I emptied my pockets, my keys, my phone, the USB drive disguised as a car key fob. "Hurry," I muttered to the guard who was moving with agonizing slowness. "Please, hurry." The guard looked at me. "What is the rush, pal?" "My life," I said. "My life is the rush." I grabbed my bag before it had even stopped moving. I ran for the elevators. The display showed the car was on the 10th floor. I couldn't wait. I hit the stairs. Courtroom 3B was on the 3rd floor. I am 75 years old. I have arthritis in my left hip. But in that stairwell, I climbed with the strength of a man half my age, fueled by a rage so pure it burned like jet fuel. 2nd floor. My breath was coming in ragged gasps. My legs burned. 3rd floor. I burst out of the stairwell door. The hallway was long and polished. Courtroom 3B was at the very end. Inside the room, the final act was playing out. Judge Vance would be picking up her pen. She would be looking at the order one last time. The document that would strip me of my rights. The document that would make me a child in the eyes of the law and a prisoner in the hands of my son. I grant the motion for emergency temporary conservatorship, she would say, her voice echoing in the silent room. Mr. Bennett is hereby appointed as the legal guardian of Harrison Bennett and his estate. Jason would let out a breath of relief. A smile would threaten to break through his mask of grief, but he would hold it back. Just one more second. Just until the ink hit the paper. Mr. Stone would lean in, looking at his watch. Thank you, Your Honor. If you could sign quickly, we need to contact the banks before they close. Time is money, as they say, and in this case, time is safety. The pen would lower. The tip would touch the page. I was 20 feet away from the double doors. I could hear the blood rushing in my ears. I could see the wood grain of the doors. I did not slow down. I did not straighten my tie. I did not compose myself. I hit the doors with my shoulder, putting my entire body weight into the impact. The doors flew open with a sound like a thunderclap that shattered the hushed atmosphere of the court. The heavy wood banged against the walls. Everyone froze. The judge jerked her hand back, the pen skidding across the paper, but not signing. Jason spun around, his eyes wide with shock. Megan dropped her purse, and there I stood, wet, out of breath, my chest heaving, but standing tall. I walked into the room. I walked straight down the center aisle, my wet shoes squeaking on the floor. I looked at the judge, then I looked at my son. Jason's face went pale. He looked like he was seeing a ghost. For a second, his mouth opened and closed like a fish out of water. "Dad," he whispered. I did not answer him. I did not look at Megan. I looked at the lawyer who was still holding his expensive briefcase. "You are right about one thing, counselor," I said, my voice booming in the silence, steady and clear. "Time is money, and you and your clients are completely out of both." I reached into my pocket and pulled out the USB drive. I held it up like a weapon. "I am Harrison Bennett," I announced to the room, "and I am here to report a crime." The silence that followed my announcement was absolute. It was the kind of vacuum that exists in the split second after a jet engine cuts out, before the screaming starts. I stood in the center aisle of the courtroom, dripping wet, my chest heaving from the run up the stairs, holding the small black USB drive in the air, like a grenade with the pin pulled. Behind me, 2 uniformed marshals from the Seattle Federal Courthouse stepped through the doors. They were not there to arrest me. They were there because Sergeant Miller had called ahead to ensure the safety of a material witness. Their presence shifted the energy in the room instantly. I was not a wandering patient. I was a man under federal protection. I looked at my son. Jason had risen halfway out of his chair. His face was a mask of pure, unadulterated terror. The color had drained from his skin, leaving him looking like wet paper. His hands, which moments ago had been dabbing away fake tears, were now gripping the edge of the mahogany table so hard his knuckles were white. He looked at me, and then he looked at the marshals, and his carefully constructed reality shattered. "Dad?" He stammered, his voice trembling, not with grief, but with the shock of a man watching a corpse walk into the room. "Dad, how are you here? The police said you were detained. They said you had a bomb." He stopped. The words hung in the air. He realized his mistake instantly. He clamped his mouth shut, but it was too late. He had just admitted he knew about the details of my arrest before anyone had told him. I lowered my arm and walked toward the bench. The lawyer, Silas Stone, stepped in front of me, blocking my path. He held up a hand, his eyes darting between me and the judge. "Your Honor, I must object," Stone said, his voice shrill. "This man is clearly unstable. Look at him. He is wet, he is disheveled, and he is shouting about crimes." This is exactly the kind of violent outburst described in Dr. Thorne's report. I ask that the bailiff restrain him for his own safety. I did not flinch. I did not step back. I looked at the lawyer with the cold detachment of a man who had stared down thunderstorms. "Step aside, counselor," I said quietly. Stone hesitated. He looked at the marshals behind me who had not moved to restrain me. He stepped back. I walked past him and stood before the bench. I looked up at Judge Vance. She was staring at me over her glasses, her pen hovering inches above the order that would have ended my life. Her expression was unreadable, stern, and calculating. "Mr. Bennett," she said, "you are late, and you are interrupting a very serious proceeding." I straightened my tie, which was crooked and damp. I smoothed back my hair. I took a deep breath, centering myself. "I apologize for the delay. Your Honor, and for my appearance," I said, my voice steady and resonating in the high-ceilinged room. "I encountered some turbulence on the way here. Specifically, I was detained at Denver International Airport due to a malicious false report filed by the plaintiff regarding an explosive device. A device that turned out to be a GPS tracker planted by my son." Jason jumped up. "That is a lie," he shouted. "He is paranoid, Your Honor. He thinks everyone is out to get him." "Sit down, Mr. Bennett," the judge snapped without looking at him. Her eyes remained locked on me. "You are here now, Mr. Bennett," she said. "Do you have counsel present?" "No, Your Honor," I said. "Then I suggest we recess so you can find a lawyer," she said. "These are serious allegations regarding your competency." "I do not need a recess, Your Honor," I said firmly. "And with all due respect to the court, I do not need a lawyer. I am appearing pro se. I am competent. I am lucid, and I am prepared to dismantle this petition right now." Stone laughed a short, nervous sound. "Pro se. Your Honor, this is absurd. He has a diagnosis of advanced dementia. He cannot represent himself. He probably doesn't even know what pro se means." I turned to Stone. "It means for oneself, counselor," I said. "It comes from the Latin. And since we are discussing definitions, perhaps we should discuss the definition of perjury. Or maybe the definition of conspiracy to commit murder." The room went deadly quiet again. Stone's smile vanished. Judge Vance leaned forward. "Those are heavy words, Mr. Bennett." "I have heavy evidence, Your Honor," I replied. "My son and his wife have presented you with a narrative. They told you I am a confused old man who forgets his own name. They told you I am a danger to myself. They told you they want to save me." I walked over to the defense table, which was empty. I set my laptop bag down. I pulled out my computer. "But a narrative is just a story," I continued, opening the lid. "In my line of work, we do not deal in stories. We deal in flight data recorders. We deal in hard evidence. And I have brought the black box." I plugged the USB drive into the laptop. I connected the HDMI cable from the court's audiovisual system. The large screen on the wall flickered to life, showing my desktop. "My son says I have lost my memory," I said, turning to face the gallery. "He says my mind is a sieve. But the irony is that while he claims I cannot remember anything, I have been recording everything." I clicked on the file named 911_call_log.wav. This morning at 8:15 a.m. a call was made to the Denver Emergency Dispatch, I said. "My son claims he made this call from the airport terminal while weeping because I ran away." I looked at Jason. He was shaking his head, muttering, "No, no, no," under his breath. Megan was staring at the table, refusing to look up. "Let us listen to the grief of a loving son," I said. I pressed play. The sound of Jason's voice filled the courtroom, amplified by the high-quality speakers. "Please help me. My father has a bomb. He is going to purify the sinners." It was loud. It was dramatic. It was a performance. I let it play for 10 seconds. Then I paused it. Judge Vance was frowning. "That sounds like a very distressed man, Mr. Bennett," she said. "It does, doesn't it?" I agreed. "But, Your Honor, I spent 30 years as an air traffic controller. My ears are trained to hear what others miss. I don't listen to the voice, I listen to the space around the voice." I advanced the track to the 12-second mark. I asked the court to listen closely to the background, I said. I played the clip. The voice sobbed. And then faintly, but clearly, the sound of the two-tone chime rang out. Ding dong. I paused it again. "Does the court recognize that sound?" I asked. The judge tilted her head. "It sounds like a bell." "It is a bell, Your Honor," I said. "Specifically, it is the arrival chime of a Schindler 5500 residential elevator." I pulled up a second file on the screen. It was a technical spec sheet from the Schindler Elevator Company website. I zoomed in on the audio sample section. I clicked play. Ding dong. The sound was identical. The pitch, the timbre, the decay. It was a perfect match. The courtroom gasped. It was a collective intake of breath that sucked the air out of the room. My son claims he was at the airport, which is a cacophony of 60 hertz hum and thousands of voices, I said, my voice rising. But that recording proves he was in the elevator of my condominium 20 miles away. He was not crying over a lost father. He was calmly riding down to the garage after planting a fake bomb in my luggage to ensure I would be arrested and miss this hearing. I turned to Jason. "You forgot the acoustics, Jason," I said. "You always were bad at physics." Jason stood up, knocking his chair over. "This is a trick," he yelled, pointing a shaking finger at me. He doctored the tape. "He is a computer wizard. He hacked it." "Sit down." Mr. Bennett, Judge Vance roared, banging her gavel. But I was not done. I had only fired the warning shot. Now I was going to drop the payload. "If the court is not convinced by the audio," I said, moving to the next file, "let us look at the medical evidence." I opened the transcript of the appointment with Dr. Thorne. I projected it onto the screen. "Mrs. Bennett here claims she has been caring for my health," I said, gesturing to Megan, who had gone deathly pale. "She claims I am on a decline. She is right. I am on a decline. But it is not natural." I clicked on the audio file from the doctor's office. The voice of Dr. Thorne filled the room. Smooth, arrogant. "The cocktail I prescribed is aggressive. The scopolamine combined with the high-dose antipsychotics will keep his short-term memory from forming." I saw the judge's eyes go wide. She looked at Megan. Megan shrank back in her chair, pulling her scarf tight around her neck, as if she were trying to hide. "He is essentially a recording device with no tape," the recording continued. "Lu lung ne du de ongta lu lang trong sao tang du to yan de kobanya. This dosage is enough to keep him confused for 6 months, enough time for you to sell the house." The audio ended. The silence that followed was heavy with horror. "That, Your Honor, is not a diagnosis," I said, my voice dropping to a whisper that carried more weight than a scream. "That is a confession. My son and his wife have been systematically poisoning me with high doses of sedatives and hallucinogens to mimic dementia. They did not want to cure me. They wanted to incapacitate me so they could liquidate my assets and leave me to rot in a state-run facility." I walked over to the bench and placed a plastic bag on the judge's desk. Inside was the orange pill bottle I had taken from my luggage. "This is the bottle the police found in my bag today," I said. "It contains oxycodone. Another gift from my son intended to get me charged with drug trafficking." I looked at the judge. "I am not a ghost, Your Honor, and I am not a vegetable. I am a father who woke up just in time to stop his own murder, and I submit to this court that the only people in this room who need supervision are the two sitting at that table." Judge Vance looked at the pill bottle. She looked at the screen. Then she looked at Jason and Megan. Her face had hardened into stone. The sympathy was gone, replaced by the cold fury of justice deceived. She turned to the bailiff. "Lock the doors," she commanded. "No one leaves this room." The sound of the heavy oak doors locking sent a tremor through the room that was felt rather than heard. The air in courtroom 3B had changed from the stale atmosphere of administrative procedure to the sharp electric tension of a crime scene. I stood before the bench, my laptop still projecting the damning audio waveform onto the screen, but I was not done. I had exposed the lie about my mind, but now I had to expose the truth about my body. I looked at Jason and Megan. They were no longer the confident accusers. They were cornered animals. Jason was sweating profusely, his eyes darting around the room, looking for an exit that was now barred. Megan was sitting frozen, her hands gripping the table so hard her knuckles were white. "Your Honor," I said, breaking the silence, "what you have heard so far is fraud. It is perjury. It is a conspiracy to steal assets. But if that were all it was, I might have been content to simply have this petition dismissed. But it is not all. Greed is a sin, but murder is a crime." Judge Vance leaned forward, her face grim. "Murder," she repeated. "Mr. Bennett, you are making accusations that go far beyond the scope of a probate hearing." "I am aware of that, Your Honor," I replied. "And I would not use that word unless I had the science to back it up." I turned to the back of the room where the bailiff was guarding the locked doors. "I request permission to call my final witness," I said. "Dr. Marcus Chang, a forensic toxicologist from the University of Washington Medical Center. I took the liberty of sending a courier with a biological sample to his lab 3 days ago when I first suspected the truth. He is waiting in the hallway." The judge nodded to the bailiff. "Let him in." The doors opened and Dr. Chang walked in. He was a small man with glasses carrying a thick file folder. He looked out of place in a courtroom filled with lawyers, but his presence carried the undeniable weight of objective fact. He walked to the witness stand and was sworn in. I did not need to question him like a lawyer. I simply needed him to read the numbers. "Dr. Chang," I said, "can you tell the court what you analyzed?" Dr. Chang opened his folder. He adjusted his glasses. "On Friday afternoon, I received a sample of hair follicles via secure courier from Mr. Harrison Bennett. I was asked to perform a broad-spectrum heavy metal and synthetic poison screening." "And what did you find, doctor?" I asked. Chang looked up, his eyes scanning the room before landing on the judge. "The results were alarming, Your Honor. In the segment of hair corresponding to growth over the last 3 months, we found lethal concentrations of arsenic. But more concerning was the presence of digoxin, a heart medication, derived from the foxglove plant." I heard a gasp from the gallery. I looked at Megan. She had put her hand over her mouth. As a pharmacist, she knew exactly what digoxin did. Dr. Chang continued, his voice devoid of emotion, which made the horror of his words even worse. "Digoxin is used to treat heart failure, but in a healthy heart, and in high doses, it causes arrhythmias. It mimics the symptoms of a natural heart attack. Combined with the arsenic, which causes confusion and organ failure, the subject would appear to die of natural causes related to old age. It is a very sophisticated way to kill someone without leaving an obvious trace during a standard autopsy." I stepped closer to the bench. "Sophisticated," I repeated. "The kind of sophistication that requires specialized medical knowledge. Perhaps the knowledge of a licensed pharmacist." I pointed at Megan. The judge looked at Megan. "Mrs. Bennett," the judge asked, her voice like ice, "do you have access to digoxin in your line of work?" Megan did not answer. She was shaking her head violently, her eyes wide with panic. I turned back to the doctor. "Dr. Chang, based on the levels you found, what was the prognosis for the subject?" Chang closed the folder. "Without intervention, the subject would have suffered a massive cardiac event within 2 to 3 weeks. It was not a matter of if, it was a matter of when." The courtroom erupted. The silence shattered into 1,000 shards of noise. The stenographer stopped typing. The lawyers in the back row were whispering furiously. This was no longer a hearing about a senile old man. This was a hearing about an assassination attempt in progress. I stood there in the center of the storm, feeling a cold calm wash over me. I had survived. I had outsmarted them. But I took no joy in it. Looking at my son, I saw only the monster I had allowed to grow in my own home. "Your Honor," I said, my voice cutting through the noise. "They didn't just want my money. They wanted to erase me. They wanted to burn my body before anyone could ask questions. That is why Megan was searching for cremation protocols. That is why they needed the conservatorship today, to sign the order for my body to be burned before a coroner could look at it." Judge Vance slammed her gavel down. The sound was like a gunshot. "Order," she shouted. "Order in this court." The room quieted down, but the tension was thick enough to choke on. "Mr. Bennett, stand up," the judge ordered, looking at Jason. Jason stood up. His legs were shaking so bad he had to lean on the table. He looked at me pleadingly. "Dad," he whispered. "Dad, please." I didn't know it wasn't me. I looked at him. The boy I had taught to ride a bike. The man I had walked down the aisle. "You didn't know," I asked softly. "You didn't know when you forged the checks. You didn't know when you planted the bomb. You didn't know when you watched me swallow that poison every night at dinner." Jason's face crumpled. He turned to Megan. His eyes were wild. It was her he screamed, pointing a finger at his wife. It was all her idea. She said it would be easy. She said he was old anyway. She said nobody would miss him. Megan jumped up her chair, clattering backward onto the floor. "You liar!" she shrieked. Her voice was shrill and hysterical. "You are a gambling addict, Jason. You owe $500,000 to loan sharks. You begged me to do it. You said they were going to break your legs if you didn't get the money. You forced me." "I forced you," Jason yelled back, his face red and distorted. "You mixed the drugs. You stole them from the pharmacy. I just wanted the money. You were the one who said he had to die." He lunged at her. It happened in slow motion. My son, the coward, raised his hand and struck his wife across the face. The sound of the slap echoed in the courtroom. Megan screamed and clawed at his face. They fell against the table, knocking over the pitcher of water. Papers flew everywhere. The fake medical reports, the forged bank statements, they were all soaked in water and trampled underfoot as the two conspirators tore at each other like rabid dogs. It was pathetic. It was disgusting. It was the final unveiling of their true selves. "Bailiffs," the judge shouted. "Restrain them. Now!" The two marshals who had been standing behind me moved with lightning speed. They tackled Jason and Megan, pulling them apart. Jason was pinned to the floor, his face pressed against the wet carpet. Megan was shoved against the wall, her hair wild and her dress torn. "Get off me!" Jason screamed. "My dad will tell you. Dad, tell them. I am your son." I looked down at him. I looked at the man who was willing to stop my heart to save his own skin. "I have no son," I said. Judge Vance stood up. Her face was pale, but her voice was steady. "This court has heard enough," she said. "Based on the sworn testimony and the physical evidence presented by Mr. Bennett and Dr. Chang, I am hereby vacating the petition for conservatorship with prejudice." She pointed her gavel at the two figures struggling in the grip of the marshals. "Furthermore, I am finding both Jason Bennett and Megan Bennett in direct contempt of court. But that is the least of your problems. Bailiff, take them into custody immediately. I am referring this matter to the district attorney's office with a recommendation that charges be filed for attempted murder conspiracy to commit murder, fraud, perjury, and elder abuse." Jason stopped struggling. The reality of the words hit him. Attempted murder. That was not a white-collar crime. That was life in prison. "No," he sobbed. "No, please. Megan slid down the wall, weeping into her hands. The judge looked at me. Her expression softened. "Mr. Bennett," she said, "I am profoundly sorry that you had to endure this. The court owes you an apology, and frankly, you owe yourself a vacation." I nodded. "Thank you, Your Honor." I watched as the marshals pulled my son to his feet. He was limp. He looked at me one last time as they dragged him toward the side door leading to the holding cells. There was no love in his eyes anymore, only the hollow terror of a man who realizes he has thrown away the only person who ever truly loved him. "Dad," he wailed. "Dad, help me." I turned my back on him. I began to pack up my laptop. I unplugged the USB drive. I put the transcript back in my bag. I did not watch them leave. I listened to the sound of the handcuffs clicking. It was the same sound I had heard in the airport that morning. But this time the cuffs were on the right wrists. The side door slammed shut. The wailing was cut off. The courtroom was silent again. I stood there alone at the table. I felt tired. A deep, bone-weary exhaustion that had nothing to do with age and everything to do with heartbreak. I had won the war. I had saved my life. I had protected my legacy. But the victory tasted like ash. I picked up my bag. I nodded to Dr. Chang, who gave me a sympathetic smile. I walked down the center aisle past the stunned lawyers and the gaping spectators. I pushed open the double doors and walked out into the hallway. The fight was over. The adrenaline was fading, and for the first time in 6 months, I could breathe. My heart was damaged, my trust was shattered, but I was alive. And as I walked toward the elevators, I knew one thing for certain. I was going to change the locks, and then I was going to buy a dog, a big one, and I was never going to eat applesauce again. The sound of handcuffs ratcheting tight is a sound you never forget, especially when it is your own flesh and blood being restrained. I stood by the plaintiff table, my hand resting on the smooth wood, and watched the end of my family line play out in high definition. Jason was not fighting anymore. The adrenaline that had fueled his attack on his wife had drained away, leaving him sagging in the grip of the federal marshals. He looked small. He looked like the little boy who used to scrape his knees playing in the driveway, but the innocence of that child had been burned away by years of greed and entitlement. Megan was weeping softly, a broken sound that elicited no sympathy from anyone in the room, not even the judge. She was being read her rights by a female officer, her expensive pharmacist coat now wrinkled and stained with the water from the pitcher they had knocked over. As the marshals began to march them toward the side exit, Jason dug his heels into the carpet. He twisted his head around looking for me. His eyes were wide and wet panic replacing the arrogance that had been there just an hour ago. "Dad," he choked out. "Dad, wait. Please, you can't let them take me." I did not move. I did not step forward to comfort him. I simply watched. "Dad, I was just desperate," he pleaded, his voice rising to a wail. "The debts were piling up. They were going to hurt me. I was just scared, Dad. I didn't want to hurt you. I just needed the money. It was a mistake, a stupid mistake." I looked at him and I felt a strange sensation in my chest. For months I had felt fear. Then I had felt anger. Then I had felt the cold determination of a soldier in battle. But now, looking at this weeping man who shared my DNA, I felt only a profound, freezing pity. It was the kind of pity you feel for a rabid animal that has to be put down not because you hate it, but because it is too dangerous to be allowed to live. "A mistake," I repeated, my voice low and level, carrying across the quiet courtroom. "Forgetting a birthday is a mistake, Jason. Buying the wrong milk is a mistake. Systematically poisoning your father with heart medication and arsenic for 6 months is not a mistake. It is a business plan." Jason sobbed, shaking his head. "I am your son. Doesn't that mean anything?" "It means everything," I said, walking slowly toward him until I was just a few feet away. "It means I gave you life. It means I paid for your education. It means I bailed you out of every trouble you ever got into. It means I welcomed you into my home when you had nowhere else to go. And in return, you decided that my life was less valuable than your gambling debts. I leaned in closer. The marshals paused, letting me have this final moment. You want to talk about money, Jason, I asked. You want to talk about the assets you were so desperate to protect. Jason looked at me, a flicker of hope in his eyes. He thought maybe I was going to cut a deal. He thought maybe I would pay for a lawyer. The judge just vacated your petition, I said. That means I am still in full control of my estate. And while I was on the plane flying here, I made some transfers. Jason froze. Transfers, he whispered. I opened my laptop bag and pulled out a single sheet of paper. It was the confirmation page of the document I had filed electronically from the cargo hold at 30,000 feet. This is the deed to the Bennett Trust, I said, holding it up so he could read the bold print. It is an irrevocable trust. Do you know what irrevocable means, Jason? He stared at the paper, uncomprehending. It means it cannot be changed, I explained. Not by me, not by you, not by any judge. I have transferred the deed to the warehouse in Seattle, the house in Denver, and the entirety of my investment portfolio into this trust. $8 million. Jason licked his lips. So it is safe, he asked, his greed momentarily overriding his fear. You protected it. I protected it from you, I said, cold as ice. The sole beneficiaries of the Bennett Trust are the Retired Pilots Assistance Fund and the widows of air traffic controllers. The money will be used to pay for medical care and housing for men and women who spent their lives serving others with honor. Men and women who would never dream of poisoning their own parents. Jason's jaw dropped. No, he whispered. You can't. That is my inheritance. It was your inheritance, I corrected him. Until you decided to cash it in early, now it is a charitable donation. You are not just going to prison, Jason. You are going to prison broke. And when you get out, if you ever get out, you will still be broke. You will have to work for a living, just like I did. I signaled to the marshals. Get him out of my sight. No, Jason screamed as they dragged him away. You can't do this! Dad, Dad! The heavy door slammed shut, cutting off his voice. The silence rushed back into the room, but it was no longer heavy. It was light. It was the silence of a burden being lifted. I turned to Dr. Chang, who was packing up his files. Thank you, Doctor, I said, shaking his hand. Your science saved my life. You saved your own life, Mr. Bennett, the doctor replied. I just read the numbers. Good luck to you. I walked over to the bailiff and retrieved my pill bottle. I walked to the trash can in the corner of the courtroom and threw it in. The orange plastic hit the bottom with a hollow thud. I picked up my bag. I walked down the aisle. I pushed open the double doors and stepped out into the hallway. The courthouse was bustling with people, lawyers running to meetings, families dealing with their own crises. None of them knew that a war had just ended in courtroom 3B. None of them knew that a father had just severed the limb to save the body. I took the elevator down to the lobby. I walked out the front doors and the cold, damp air of Seattle hit my face. The rain had stopped. The clouds were breaking apart, revealing patches of deep blue sky. I took a deep breath, filling my lungs with the clean oxygen. It tasted sweet. It tasted like freedom. I stood on the sidewalk and pulled out my phone. I had a notification from the airline. My return ticket to Denver was ready for check-in. I looked at the screen. Denver. My empty house. The memories of the betrayal. The ghost of the son I used to love. I swiped left. Cancel flight. I opened the booking app. I typed in a new destination. A destination I had promised myself I would visit 30 years ago with my late wife but never made the time for. Because I was always working, always saving, always worrying about the future. Paris. Charles de Gaulle. First class. One way. I pressed confirm. The screen flashed. Booking successful. I put the phone in my pocket. I flagged down a taxi. Where to, the driver asked. The airport, I said. But take the scenic route. I have time. As the car pulled away, merging into the traffic, I looked back at the courthouse one last time. I felt a phantom pain in my chest, a dull ache where my fatherly love used to be. It would take time to heal. It would take time to stop looking over my shoulder, to stop checking my food for poison. But I knew I would heal. I was Harrison Bennett. I had navigated through storms that grounded lesser men. I looked at the camera lens of my own life, breaking the fourth wall in my mind. Blood is a powerful thing. We are taught that it is thicker than water, that it binds us together forever. But blood is not a suicide pact. It is not a license for abuse. It is not a shield that protects the wicked from the consequences of their actions. I loved my son, but I learned the hard way that you cannot save someone who is trying to drown you. Sometimes the bravest thing you can do is cut the rope. I lost a son today. It is a tragedy, and I will mourn him. But I gained something far more valuable. I gained the rest of my life. I gained the right to sleep without fear. I gained the dignity of choosing my own path. My name is Harry. I am 75 years old. I have no family left, but I have a plane ticket to Paris and $8 million worth of peace of mind. And for the first time in a long time, I am cleared for takeoff. If you are listening to this and you feel trapped by the people who are supposed to love you, remember this. You are the pilot of your own life. Do not let anyone else take the controls, especially if they are steering you into a mountain. Eject if you have to. Survive, because the view from the other side of the storm is beautiful. Thank you for listening to my story. If you have ever had to make a hard choice to save yourself, let me know in the comments. Hit like and subscribe to hear more stories from the survivors. I will see you in Paris. Over and out.